Hello again, and thank you all for joining us here in Hassens County. I'm glad that you could join us again today for another Ttrpg talk. This series takes a look at tabletop role-playing games and related materials and makes suggestions for some of your own home games and takes a look at some of my own materials. Out there, as you might know, there are a number of games that revolve around the basic idea of the post, by which, of course, I mean like correspondence through like letters and stuff sent through the mail or through like couriers and things like that. The way that we used to do things a long time ago. Unlike a lot of my peers, I who kind of grew up during the beginnings and sort of like the when digital communications really started getting intense. I probably have a stronger connection to the post and postal services and things like that than a number of my peers. Partly because I grew up working for a family newspaper, so obviously that meant I spent a lot of time in post offices. But also because growing up, I was actually involved in, I guess you could kind of call it a sort of like a role-playing game, where we would pretend to be certain historical people, writing as part of my religious education program in our church. We would have the kid pretend to be a famous Unitarian Universalist or someone associated with liberal religion, basically, and then an adult writing back and forth with an adult, and so we drop off a letter for each other every Sunday, and it'd be secret. We wouldn't know who the other person was until the end of like the 4 or 6 week program. And then also I had a number of pen pals growing up because my mom encouraged me to write with several friends of hers who lived abroad. Not friends of hers, but like children of her friends who lived abroad. That was definitely some things that led to me having a stronger connection to actual like writing letters and sending through the post and having to actually sit and wait for days, weeks to finally get a reply. um, so yeah, uh, Obviously there's a number of role playing games that attempt to sort of like embrace that experience of writing through the post. As I mentioned earlier, a number of them have become quite famous, like Quill. And of course, there are variations on Quill, like Quill EXE, where essentially you are, writing letters, or at least writing letters as a character. The game we're going to be discussing today, though, takes a little bit of a different spin on that, and that is Ghostbox. The basic idea behind Ghostbox, which, by the way, was created by Marx Shepherd, is that you, as in the player, are not role playing the people who are writing the letters necessarily, but rather instead you are role playing a postal service box that has basically been abandoned by the postal service. Maybe something happened and you just kind of fell off the map. Maybe you were supposed to be kind of scrapped or something, and for some reason you just weren't. Maybe you're just in a really weird distant location and everybody's kind of forgotten that you're there except for the couple of people who drop off letters in you. As I said, you're role playing this post box and you're collecting letters over the course of time. The basic idea for the actual role of play is that there is a solitaire game that is called Osmosis that is kind of going on, that actually decides what prompts you're going to be acting on. So this does require the use of a standard playing card deck. For those of you who don't know what Osmosis is, or the basic rules, I definitely encourage that you look it up. There's a halfway decent Wikipedia article on it. There are some places where you can basically play Osmosis all through a computer, so you don't actually necessarily need to have the actual deck itself. That is incorporated into Ghostbox because each of the suits is associated with a specific person, or at least a type of person who is potentially writing letters and dropping them off in the box. These writers also decide how long of a time period has passed between each of these letters. Um, and also, it's important to note that the letter or you don't have to write a letter out for every single prompt. Instead, you can just write a fragment. And basically, each of the prompts for each of the four senders give you both a description of like the specific topic, and it also asks you a question that help kind of drive your writing in a specific direction. Another thing that each of these suits, each of these senders has, is it asks you a number of questions. Some of them are about the sender itself to kind of give you a basic starting point. So, for example, for the forlorn, it asks who is the sender, who is the recipient, and why are they apart, right? So, for example, kind of touching into the sort of 19th, early 20th century kind of feel that I get for a number of these topics, and the Victorian postal service sort of theme that I kind of get from some of these prompts. Maybe they're two individuals who have been separated because one of them is living abroad somewhere, or is because they're in the military or something like that. Those are pretty common things. Maybe they're separated because of business. Maybe they're separated because their families won't let them get married, or stuff like that. Those are all potentially things. So some examples of topics. So for example, if I had played the Four of Hearts, then I would write a letter, a full letter, or maybe just a fragment that describes the writer's dream of starting a family together. And the question it asks is, how many children will you have? Right? So we could talk about, in the fragment, maybe the individual is talking about how they dream of having a family, but having maybe a small one, and that their children would, maybe describe some things that they dream that their children would potentially be doing in the future. Like maybe describing how, I wish that we could, maybe have a child and they would look just like you and be really great at doing X. And X is what if something that the intended recipient would be pretty good at doing, or something they enjoy, right? So the basic idea is that as you're going through the cards and you're playing the game, you decide on how many senders you want to include, because that will determine how many prompts that you're going to actually be responding to and which types of prompts you want to respond to. As with many other versions of Solitaire, Osmosis also has you have a deck that you kind of flip through like 3 cards at a time to potentially pull things out of, for whenever you are playing the game, to try to get extra cards out if you can't get them. Whenever you go through that entirety of the deck and start again from the beginning, they ask you to basically describe how the post box is deteriorating. So the number of cards on the top row basically kind of decides what's wrong with the card, what's wrong with the post box, how is it deteriorating, stuff like that. So for example, if there were 4 cards on the top, so like that heart, the heart suit on the top, right? If there's 4 hearts there, then maybe an animal has made a nest inside of the post box, and it's like ripping up some of the letters and like using it as a nest and stuff like that. Or 9, maybe the post box is starting to corrode and a lot of water is starting to leak into the post box, and it's damaging all of these letters that have been deposited over the many, many years into it. And then eventually, if you have not played any cards from out of the deck or from any of the other spots in order to put them into the 4 rows, then basically that means the game's over. Essentially, you've hit a point where something has happened to the post box to finally take it completely out of commission. So again, that was Ghostbox, a game of dead letters from Marx Shepherd. I think this game is actually pretty interesting, where it basically has you explore the idea of letters abandoned, letters not responded to. Not only because it makes it interesting to sort of explore that basic idea of what all of these different potential letters that have just gotten lost, right? But also the basic idea of how all of these different senders and the topics that they're writing about have kind of all ended up merging together into this one location, this one abandoned post office box that happens to be central to all of this action going on around it, even though it actually plays no real role necessarily in the actual action itself. So it kind of becomes a silent observer, which is what the player is in this particular instance, the silent observer of all of the stuff that's kind of going around in the community around this post office box. So I think that's another reason why this game is really interesting. Thank you all for joining us again today. Links, as always, can be found in the description down below. If you'd like to learn some more about other games in the Ttrpg series that we are creating, whether that is more SRDs, other games, talking about different topics, kind of like what we did with our Lost Technologies video, or looking at other potential interesting topics going on in the future, I definitely encourage that you subscribe and hit the notification bell in order to be notified of any future videos. Also, of course, down below you will find links to all the various other places you can find me on the internet, or of course you can find my own games on the itch store. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and I do hope you have a good zone. And don't forget to rate your itch purchases.